Moms who know do less so they can focus on what matters most, taking care of themselves, their families, and living their God-given purpose. Moms who know are simplifying motherhood and focusing on the little things they can do that grow to have a huge impact. You are connecting with your family, your true self, and your purpose. You are a mom who knows. So glad you guys are here with me today on the Moms Who Know podcast. So this episode came about because I was at my local library and I saw a book called How to Be a Happier Parent. And I thought, oh, awesome, I'm going to read that. Who doesn't want to be a happier parent, right? And as I read it, I was like, oh, this is so good. We need to have the author on the podcast. And so I reached out to her and she graciously accepted and is here on the podcast today. And in this episode, we're really going to dive into some cultural shifts that have made us a little bit less happy as a generation of parents, as well as some specific things we can do with discipline and other things that are maybe making us a little less happy as parents than we could be. So you're really going to enjoy this as we work to not only be better parents and to really be there for our kids, but to find joy in the journey of parenting. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls podcast. If you're looking for stories to inspire your little girl to pursue her dreams without limits, then this is the podcast for you to check out. Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls is an expansion of its best-selling book, and it tells hundreds of bedtime stories about the lives of extraordinary women. I recently listened to the story of Wangari Maathai, Dr. Wangari Maathai from Kenya. And in her life, she came up against obstacle after obstacle. And as she did, people would tell her, no, you can't do that. And she would say, why not? And she would keep on going down that road and try it anyway. She pursued an education, even though that was really almost unheard of for girls in Kenya at the time. She went to the United States and got more education. She got a PhD. She then had a really rough time where she lost her family, she lost her job, she just lost her place to live, everything. And so she thought, what can I do with this time? And that was when she really pursued working with the women in Kenya, and she won a Nobel Prize for her work with those women. I'm going to let you listen to this episode to hear the rest of that. You can find that at the Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls podcast on your favorite podcast player. And now let's continue with today's episode. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and I'm joined today by KJ Dell'Antonia. KJ, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I read KJ's book and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. We have to have her on the show. So let me tell you a little bit about her so you know what to expect today. KJ is the author of a fantastic book called How to Be a Happier Parent. And that she let me know that the paperback is coming out in June. You guys can definitely, after we talk today, you'll probably want to go and check that out. She has worked as an editor of Motherload for the New York Times. She is a mom of 4 who lives on a farm and with all her kids and animals and a lot going on. And she's also working on, she has her first fiction book coming out. So that is a lot of great stuff. And I think it's exciting that you have written about parenting and you're in the trenches. How old are your kids now?
My kids are all teenagers now. My kids are 14, 15, and 18.
Okay, awesome. So we've got a couple teenagers over here, and I know from experience that those are tough years and wonderful years. Sometimes all on the same day, you go back and forth, right? From the tough to the wonderful. But we are going to dive into all things parenting today and talking about specifically how to be a happier parent, which is something that you really went deep into in your book. And one of the things that you talk about is the whole idea of parenting shifting. In a few generations ago that parenting used to be more about the parents and now it's more about the kids. So, will you talk to us a little bit about that concept and what you've kind of seen through your research about that?
Well, I think that all of us, as people who grew up with parents from a different time, can recognize that we do things differently, and in some ways that's a really positive thing. We think about things differently, we look at our kids differently, we have different expectations that are maybe less narrow than some of us dealt with as children. But on the other hand, I think we can all look back and see that our parents were quite concerned with their own lives and their own jobs, or their own evolution from one sort of stage of life to another. They were playing tennis. They were making poker dates. They were, they were doing their own thing, and they expected us to do our own thing. And that is something that has really changed in past years.
Yeah. Okay. So, what the shift now, what do you kind of see now that's different?
Well, we have definitely evolved into a moment where a lot of us see parenting as our primary function. You will hear even women who are women in particular, and I'm just going to go that way, women who are very, very, very well known in their fields say things like, well, of course my kids come first. And I don't know that that is something that Gloria Steinem would necessarily have said. She maybe isn't, your favorite example, but I don't think it's the way that people talked about their family lives. Our families should be and are as an incredible source of joy and richness and pleasure and a place to find refuge. They are so very, very many things. But this move to thinking of them as more important than anything else at all times is kind of new. And that's a little bit of a weird way to put it, because none of us would, obviously all of us, if our kids are bleeding or need us, are we going to drop everything? Yes. On the other hand, if it's a question of, can you add a Saturday shift at work, or should you make plans with a girlfriend to go out in the evening, and then your child says, well, but I really need a ride to so-and-so's house and I was hoping, we put our kids first in those circumstances too. And I think that is the thing that is different.
Okay, I think that's so interesting. And I feel already resistance coming up to this idea. I can hear people saying, but my kids are the most important. This is the most important. And I think that, we have been conditioned to believe that, to think that that's true. And obviously, you're not saying that family isn't important. Here you are, you're a
No
mother
way.
of 4 kids. You care very deeply about your family. And yet, what is the shift here?
The shift is towards putting ourselves at the bottom of the list. And that is the problem. And one way to think about that, if you're resisting it, is to look at your own children and say, well, when they are older, do I want them to live their lives in service of their small children? And I think that the answer to that for most of us is probably no. I want them to have whole, rich lives in lots of areas. I want them to make choices for themselves. I don't want them to feel like they sort of have to do what society or someone else might expect them to do. So when you think about it that way, it becomes easier. And it also maybe becomes easier when you think about what it is that we are showing. What are we demonstrating to our kids? Are we showing them a rich and full and amazing adult life, or are we showing them an adult life that consists entirely of driving them to hockey practice, which some days is in fact what my adult life looks like?
Yeah, and I think it is for all of us. And yet I love this is something that we talk about a lot on the podcast is self-care. And the truth is there has to be some kind of balance of taking care of yourself and taking care of your kids. And that's why we're even having the conversation, right? It's not because we're veering too much into the self care side, it's because
Not
we're veering
hardly.
too little. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that we forget or we think, oh, I'll put that off. I'll do that later because my kids need me now. And yet, maybe what I hear you saying is the most important thing that we can show our kids is that we are valuable and worth taking care of right now.
Yes, because they are also valuable and worth themselves taking care of, if that makes any sense. I mean, one thing that happens when we do put our kids, when we put them so blatantly at the center of our lives that they can see that their hockey practice, just for example, takes precedence over everything else, we're giving them a really wrong idea about the way that life works and the way that life should work. And we're also sort of burdening them with the job of keeping us amused and entertained in a weird way. We even often end up burdening them with the need to keep us happy, with feeling like they're responsible for our emotions, especially when we get super invested in their achievements in sports or extracurricular activities or academics. You find kids feeling like the most important thing to their parents is how they do, how they perform. And that is a really tough position to be in as a kid.
Definitely. I mean, think about that, the pressure that that puts on kids. And I don't, well meaning parents are not doing that on purpose. But if you really, stop and ponder that and think what that would be like for a child, that's a really interesting way to think about it. Now, when I was reading your book, there were two chapters in particular, and I think we're only going to have time to get into one of these today, but there was one that I loved that talked about discipline. And I think that you said that most parents say that the thing they like least about parenting is disciplining their children. So let's talk a little bit about how we can make that part of parenting better.
Well, that was a really interesting thing I came across in my research. I asked a lot of closed questions for people about what made them happier or less happy as parents, but I also asked one open-ended question in my work, and that was basically, just name something that's hard. And so many people responded with discipline in one form or another that I went back through my research questions to see if I had somehow cued that. Like, had I used the word discipline 60 times in this? And I had not. It's just something that a lot of us are really uncomfortable with. We don't like feeling like we don't like that verb. We don't like feeling like we're disciplining them. We don't like punishing them. That's something people say. We don't like making them do things they don't want to do. And we really look at that as a negative. So I went out and tried to talk to as many and I can relate to that. Like I completely dread those moments. So I went out and found as many experts as I could. And I talked to some really wonderful people, who encouraged me to see discipline differently, to not think of that moment when you have to correct a kid or you have to give them a consequence as a result of their actions as the discipline, but rather to see all of your interactions around turning them into, people that can live in society in a healthy and helpful way. All of that is discipline, because the root of discipline is obviously disciple. And that means that's about teaching, not about punishing.
Yeah. So I would love to know then how this new idea and understanding of discipline has changed things in your own household with the way you discipline your kids.
Well, one of the wonderful things that someone did for me was to remind me that really you want your kids to screw this stuff up on your watch. If your child is going to stay up all night playing a video game instead of doing their homework, you want them to do it in sixth grade, not their freshman year of college. If they're going to, spend an exorbitant, accidentally, quote unquote, spend a lot of money on apps, you want them to do it when a lot of money is $27, not when a lot of money is, thousands of dollars that they don't have as a young adult. You want the opportunity. You want them to make mistakes while you're there to help them, not to fix it for them, but to help them fix it. And once somebody explained that to me, I suddenly felt so much better about all the areas in which, we have a grand and impressive screw up here, no matter how big it is. Better that they do it now while I'm able to help so that I can show them how to deal with these things later when they're out on their own.
That's so good. I would love to hear some specific examples. You've got teenagers. They are not, I'm sure your kids are wonderful, but it's the nature of the beast. They're making mistakes all the time, right? Like I know mine are. That's just life. That's just what they're doing. And so I'd love to hear some examples. You don't have to name names or anything, but
It's the nice thing about having multiple kids. You can give examples without necessarily outing any of them super specifically. I would say that the biggest example and also the hardest example for many of us is in the area of homework and academics. So many kids let things, they let an assignment fall through the cracks, or they have a teacher that gives the opportunity to correct a test, but they don't bother to do it. Or, there's a lot of ways that they can basically screw that up. And parents of high school students especially get super stressed about that because it feels like it can have long-term real life ramifications. So to get yourself, well, first of all, if they can do it earlier, that's better so that they're taking things over, but not everybody does. So boys especially often are still learning to get themselves organized and to value the, education. They're still learning that as they get a lot older. So that can be super tough to sit back and watch. And I think what I'd like people to know is just that the value of their finding their own way through those problems, the value of saying things like, maybe you need to consider what your assignments are. Maybe you need to look ahead to the next week rather than, here, I have made you a list and this is what you are going to do. It's actually worth more than the difference in grades.
Yes. And I love that focus. The more that we can do that and teach our kids to be self-reliant, we're teaching them. And that's exactly coming back to this idea of discipline. So we're not saying, you messed up, you didn't get your homework in, here's how you need to do it for next time. We're saying, okay, how are you going to make it better for next time?
Right.
What do you need to do? And it comes back to them, and the responsibility rests with them.
Right. And I had a kid who really loves, I'm going to this was some time ago, so we'll just out him, loves his video games. And he had ordered and I believe paid for out of his allowance a game for one of his, I don't even remember which device, the Switch or the something, whatever device it was at the time. And we had at the time a weekends only rule on that kind of gaming. That's evolved because the kids are older and life is different. But at the time we had that and the game showed up on a Tuesday. And this was really hard. And had I been able to, I would have just kept it until Friday, but I think he must have gotten the mail. So he had it. And sure enough, that night we found him in his bed under the covers, with, don't I wish that would have been with a book? No, with this video game and had to take it away and had to have a really big talk about, him giving us, he had said, oh, I can hold on to it. I'll be okay. I won't use it. I can be strong. So we look at all the things we were able to cover there. Not giving yourself that kind of temptation, making promises, the way that your parents are disappointed in you when you can't live up to those promises. I mean, this kid felt terrible by the end of this. And obviously we imposed, I don't even remember, I'm sure we took both game and device away for some significant period of time. But what's really important and what has really stuck is, I think, far more, that idea of okay, look, you actually put yourself in a position where it was really hard for you not to screw up. So let's talk about that. And how many opportunities do you get to talk about that? Not that many, unless you let them make these kind of mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a learning opportunity when you let them do the thing and let them fail at it and then let them learn from it.
And that's something
So,
we need throughout our entire lives. That like, don't buy the chips if you have a hard time not eating the chips. Don't don't order the dessert if you don't want. I'm just using food examples, and that's not the best example. But put your shoes out first thing in the morning. Set out your exercise clothes if that's what you want to do first. Finding ways not to set yourself up for failure. Gee, that's a great life lesson. I wish somebody had taught it to me a lot younger.
totally. I love that. Well, this kind of comes down to the idea of parents doing less because you're saying you're not stepping in ahead of time and you're not the one taking the video game before. You're letting them figure that out. You're not saying, "Oh, I'm going to lock up the food cabinet at night if that's their issue or lock up this or do that." You're saying, "I'm going to let you learn. I'm going to take a step back and do a little bit less so that you can have the opportunity to learn." And to me, that really is the idea of simplifying what we do as parents. And let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we can do less of that are going to make us happier parents.
Well, we can do less moderating of our kids' homework and of what they are required to bring to their sports and things like that. We can do less arranging of rides for them if they're in a position where they need to get a ride to play practice or something along those lines. We can basically we should be looking at almost everything we do for our kids and asking, could my kid be doing this? And if the answer is maybe, then giving them a shot at it. And this isn't something, I'm not some sort of genius withdrawn, chill parent by any means. This is stuff I have been taught over the years by the experts that I've interviewed, by talking to parents that have been through this who have older kids, by talking to the world's greatest second grade teacher, Mrs. Martin, who taught me so much about raising my children. These are this is stuff that it takes time to figure out. But if every time, just for example, just today I needed to call one of my children's pediatricians to ask a question about the child's health. And the child in question is a teenager and an older teenager. And I did stop to think, well, could she do this? And the answer in this case was no. But when we're actually at the physician's office, I don't go in with them anymore because I don't need to, and they need to be up there and giving their own information and filling out their own forms and asking me when they have questions, because someday I won't be sitting there.
It's so easy to just keep doing things because we've always done them, whether that is for our toddler or for our teenager. I just recently, my 3-year-old was going to take a bath and I said, "Come here so I can take off your shirt." And he said, "Mom, I can do that myself." And I was like,
Oh,
"Oh, I didn't know." Like I literally didn't
yes.
know he could take off his own shirt. I knew he could do pants but shirts are tricky, but he could. And he proceeded to do it by himself. And I thought, "Oh, okay, like now he needs to do that on his own now that he knows how to do it." And I think forms at the doctor's office, great example. Even with my teenagers, I do it because I've always done it. I
Yes.
don't stop to think, "Oh, of course they can fill out their own form." I do have them do their own school form because I know they can do that. All they need is my signature. But it's interesting how so often we don't even stop to think about
Well, and
the things that we're doing.
it's often easier to do it yourself than to teach them how to do it if it's something a little bit more complicated. Or sometimes we just have a wrong idea about what it is that they're supposed to do. This is taking me back in time to that world's best second grade teacher. I remember a time, so I had two second graders at this moment, and we have a very small school. So they were both in this same class, and they came home with this assignment to do an oral book report. They were supposed to, present to the class with a demonstration, with some kind of thing that they had created. And they came home with this assignment, and they came home with it in a week when I was traveling for work, and I believe my husband was also traveling in the worst possible moment. Like I could only look at that and just go, there is absolutely no way I can help these children complete this assignment. There's no way we can do it. This is a catastrophe. One of them in particular is never going to be able, it's really hard for that child to summarize things. This is going to be so awful. And so I made a bunch of mistakes here. And the first one was to whine on social media, which the second grade teacher saw. So that was a really great moment. Excellent moments. But she reached out to me, and like I said, she's wonderful. And she said, look, just let them do it. You are thinking, and I believe I also had occasion to interview another Julie Lithcott-Hames about this moment. And everyone said, just let them do it. You may be surprised. This teacher has designed this project as the culmination of a series of things in which they have done small bits of the things they need to do for this larger project, so they can do each individual thing. And she just wants them to have a chance to put all of those things together. And I didn't really have any choice. I wasn't home. I didn't help them. Came back the night before the thing that they had to do, and they had to present it and asked them to practice for me. And the truth is that if I had helped my daughter with this report, it would have been more about the subject of the book and less about the pony that was, the person in the book had. But it didn't matter, because the teacher's only goal there was that the child have read a book and stand up in front of the class and say something coherent about it.
Yeah, and that was it. And that's so good. And think of all the things, right, that she learned, your daughter learned from doing that report that would not have happened. And it's so, you were gone in that situation and it had to happen. But if we can do that, if we can take a step back and let our kids do that, so much good can come from that in so many ways. I mean, we touched on a little bit the idea of self-care earlier. We can only have time and take time for self-care when we are taking a step back from doing everything from our kids. They really go hand in hand.
Yes, because you could do, this is an endless job, right? You could do things for this 24/7. You could help that child polish that book report to a glowing sheen and provide the most amazing prop to go along with Laura Ingalls Wilder or whatever it is. And that can be really tempting because you can do it. And heck, I bet most of us could just knock the heck out of a second grade project at this stage, right? We can make that thing look really good. But yes. I can't tell you how many teachers and librarians and other education professionals that I have talked to that say, all I want is to see projects that are clearly done by the kids. I want a poster board with ballpoint pen scribbles on it. I don't want it to have, a duct tape border with sticker letters from the store and stuff like that. I just want them to have like 6 crayons and put everything in the tiny left-hand corner, even though they have the giant poster board, because then I know it was them. The goal of the second grade project is not the best project. It's the best project that can be done by a 7-year-old.
Totally. Oh, that's so good. Now, in all this, I'm hearing the idea that we can take go ahead and decide to do less. So my question for you is, how will simplifying really help us to be happier parents?
When you simplify in that, in actually any area, you can really find yourself, the pressure becomes less. Recognizing that if you're, for example, just to go back to that second grade project, if you're looking at it and going, oh my gosh, that looks like a 7-year-old done it. Well, that's what it's supposed to look like. And accepting and embracing that really frees you up to let your kids be who they are and do what they can do, and to find a role that is more encouraging and supporting, and scaffolding is a great word they use in education, where you're only reaching out a hand to do the things that they have asked you to help with. It frees up a lot of your time, and it also frees up your stress, because suddenly you're able to more clearly see that project is theirs. not yours. So when you are looking at your evening and saying, I have so much to do, that should not be on the list.
Yes. Okay. I totally agree. I am right there with you. I think that's so valuable for us as moms, for our kids, for the whole culture of our family when we are a little less stressed because we're staying in our lane and we're doing what is actually our job and we're letting our kids do their job. So we've talked about so many good things today. I'm sure people will want to learn more from you. Where is the best place that people can go to find you?
The best place to find me is at kjdell'antonia.com, where you will find information about both how to be a happier parent, along with resources, a list of mantras that happier parents might be interested in, some videos, and you'll also find my new novel, The Chicken Sisters, there as well.
Oh, I'm so excited for you and your new book. I know books are a labor of love and a long process, so I'm sure that's exciting to have that out. We will link to that, and that will be in the show notes if you guys want to go and check that out. So, we always finish with this question. We've talked about a lot of things today, but what one little thing do you hope that moms will take action on after hearing our conversation today?
I hope that the one thing you could do today is take one decision and make it for you and not them. Whether it's what to have for dinner, or whether or not to stop at the dry cleaner on the way home from school, or whether to which family movie to pick, or anything along those lines. Just ask yourself, wait, what do I want? And could they possibly just enjoy that too?
That is such a good one. Okay, I think that's so good and so simple, you guys. Definitely do that today. We can all do that one. So, KJ, thank you so much for being with us and the things you've taught us today.
Thank you for having me. Super fun.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to Moms Who Know. There were a lot of little tidbits in this episode about how to be a happier parent and things that you can really do and put into action. But here's the thing, you don't have to do it all. Keep it simple. Doing just a little bit counts. What matters is that you do something, that you take action. So, my question for you is, what one little thing are you going to take action on today? Will you do me a favor? Take a screenshot of today's episode right now and then go ahead and send it to me. You can tag me on Instagram or Facebook and let me know what one little thing you're going to do because of what you heard today. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on Moms Who Know.